The sharp, almost aggressive thud of the letterbox against the brick wall of Eleanor Vance's quaint suburban home always carried a faint tremor of anxiety, a subtle disruption to the quiet hum of her carefully cultivated world. Usually, it was just the daily cascade of glossy flyers promising pizza deals or the innocuous crinkle of utility bills. But today, the sound resonated differently, a dissonant note in the otherwise perfect symphony of her sun-drenched kitchen. Eleanor, a woman who measured her days not by the clock, but by the unfurling of new leaves and the opening of fresh blossoms, was deep in a ritual she cherished above almost all others, her morning check on the burgeoning life outside her back door. Her small, meticulously tended backyard garden was less a patch of earth and more a living tapestry, each plant a thread in the vibrant narrative of her life. Here, the hydrangeas swelled with such a profound blue they seemed to capture fragments of the sky itself. There, the jasmine exhaled a sweet, intoxicating perfume that clung to the humid morning air, and nestled amongst the burgeoning life were the intricate wooden hotels she'd lovingly built for the industrious native bees, their buzzing a constant, soothing drone. Eleanor knew every inch of this verdant sanctuary, every delicate tendril, every vibrant bloom, every stubborn root. It was precisely this intimate knowledge that had made her keenly aware of a particular, somewhat audacious plant that had quietly asserted its presence a few weeks prior. It had emerged near the base of her prized French lavender, an unassuming green against the silvery green of its fragrant neighbor. Its leaves were broad, almost palmate, with a subtle, velvety fuzz that captured the dew in tiny, glistening pearls. Unlike the fleeting dandelions or invasive crabgrass that she ruthlessly eradicated, this plant possessed a quiet dignity, a peculiar resilience that bordered on defiance. It didn't spread aggressively, nor did it choke out its companions. It simply was. Eleanor, with her deep-seated reverence for all things green, had initially considered plucking it, an automatic response to anything uninvited. But something in its tenacious spirit, its self-contained beauty, had stayed her hand. It seemed harmless, a curious anomaly, almost charming in its persistent growth. She'd watched it daily, a tiny, unresolved question mark in her otherwise orderly botanical world, promising herself she'd identify it eventually, perhaps even incorporate it if it proved benign. The thought of the plant, however, vanished like morning mist as her hands, still faintly dusted with the earthy scent of potting soil, reached for the day's mail. Tucked neatly, almost maliciously, between an advertisement for car insurance and a local diner's menu, was the envelope. It was stark white, heavy, and bore the universally recognizable, severe block-lettered logo of the Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association. A familiar, almost physical knot of dread began to coil in the pit of Eleanor's stomach. The HOA was a silent, omnipresent entity in Lakeview Estates, a faceless bureaucracy that governed everything from the approved shades of exterior paint to the precise height of one's mailbox. They were largely invisible until they weren't, and when they surfaced, it was rarely for pleasantries. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tore open the seal, the crisp rip echoing the sudden fissure in her peaceful morning. Her eyes, accustomed to discerning the minute details of plant life, scanned the cold, detached language of the document. Violation notice. The words jumped out like venomous insects. Property Code 7.3. C. Unapproved plant growth. Her brow furrowed in confusion. Noxious weed identified. A wave of disbelief washed over her, cold and sharp. Noxious weed, in her garden. She, Eleanor Vance, who meticulously composted, who spoke to her plants, who knew the botanical name for almost every specimen within a 10-mile radius. And then, the number, bolded and underlined, that seemed to scorch the page, a $500 fine. $500 for a plant. The absurdity would have been comical if it hadn't felt so profoundly unjust. Eleanor stood frozen, the harsh white paper, a stark contrast to the vibrant green world beyond her window. Her gaze, guided by an invisible thread of premonition, drifted out to her serene backyard. Her eyes fell, almost magnetically, to the small, fuzzy-leafed plant that stubbornly held its ground beside the flourishing lavender. That was it. It had to be, the unnamed, unassuming plant, which she had half admired for its resilience, was now the subject of this punitive decree. A surge of emotions, sharp and conflicting, washed over her. The initial shock, quickly followed by a simmering bewilderment, then a hot, indignant anger. How could something so seemingly innocent, so quietly vibrant, be deemed a noxious weed? How could the very organization meant to preserve the harmony of their community wield such a heavy hand over a single, living thing? The notice gave her 5 days to remedy the violation or face escalating fines and even forced removal by an HOA-approved contractor, with additional charges, of course. Eleanor felt a profound sense of disorientation, as if the very ground beneath her perfectly manicured lawn had shifted. Her peaceful morning had dissolved into a baffling, bureaucratic nightmare, leaving her reeling and utterly clueless as to what this peculiar plant truly was, and, more pressingly, what desperate measure she would have to take next. The $500 fine notice lay accusingly on Eleanor's kitchen counter, a stark white rectangle against the warm wood, each word a cold, unfeeling hammer blow against her peace. The initial shock had morphed into a simmering disbelief, quickly followed by a resolute determination to right this absurd wrong. She wasn't one to back down from a challenge, especially when her beloved garden, an extension of her very soul, was under attack. Her first instinct was to call. The HOA's general inquiry line, listed at the bottom of the notice, rang with an automated, saccharine voice that offered a labyrinth of options, none of which seemed to pertain to my beautiful, harmless plant has been misidentified as a noxious weed. After navigating through a frustrating series of prompts, she finally reached a human, a drone-like voice named Brenda, who sounded perpetually bored. Eleanor launched into her explanation, her voice a mix of earnestness and barely contained indignation, describing the plant, its unassuming nature, her meticulous gardening practices, and the sheer impossibility of it being a noxious weed. Brenda, however, was a wall of corporate politeness, interjecting only with pre-programmed phrases. All violations are issued in accordance with Article 7, Section 3, Subsection C of the Lakeview Estates Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. Ma'am, or you have 5 business days to remedy the violation, or further penalties will apply. There was no room for nuance, no space for dialogue, just a relentless recitation of rules. Eleanor tried again, patiently, then less patiently, to explain that there must be a mistake, perhaps a misidentification by the inspector. Brenda's response was always the same, a digital echo of the notice itself, devoid of empathy or understanding. After 3 equally fruitless phone calls, each ending with Eleanor feeling more exasperated than the last, she turned to email, hoping the written word might convey the logic that her spoken words could not. She composed a detailed message, attaching photos of the plant in question, even including images of her entire garden, to demonstrate its well-maintained state. She cited her years of gardening experience, her commitment to native flora, and respectfully requested a revaluation by a qualified horticulturist. The automated reply was instantaneous. Your inquiry has been received. Please allow 3 to 5 business days for a response. 5 days later, a curt, 2-sentence email arrived, signed by a community compliance officer named Ms. Albright. Your appeal has been reviewed. The violation stands as issued. Please refer to the initial notice for details regarding compliance. No explanation, no acknowledgement of her photos, just a cold, dismissive affirmation of the original judgment. Eleanor's frustration began to curdle into a bitter resentment. This wasn't just about a plant or a fine, it was about being unheard, dismissed by an impersonal system. She decided to attend the next HOA board meeting, a monthly ritual held in the sterile, fluorescent-lit community clubhouse. She arrived early, armed with her printed emails, the violation notice, and even a small, carefully potted sample of the weed itself, hoping to appeal directly to the board members. The meeting was a tedious affair of budget reports and discussions about playground equipment. When the homeowner concerned segment finally arrived, Eleanor, heart pounding, stepped forward. "My name is Eleanor Vance, and I received a violation notice for a noxious weed in my garden," she began, her voice trembling slightly but firm. Before she could elaborate, a sharp, authoritative voice cut her off. "Ms. Vance, is it?" It was Miss Albright, seated at the head of the long table, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her spectacles perched precisely on her nose. Miss Albright was the embodiment of HOA authority, impeccably dressed, unsmiling, and possessing an almost preternatural ability to shut down any deviation from protocol. "We have reviewed your appeal, Ms. Vance, as per Article 7, Section 3, Subsection C. Any unapproved plant growth deemed detrimental to the aesthetic harmony of Lakeview Estates, or identified a noxious or invasive species, shall be subject to immediate removal. The plant in question has been identified as such." Eleanor tried to interject, "But it's not noxious. I've been gardening for years, I know my plants, and this one is." Miss Albright raised a perfectly manicured hand, cutting her off again. "Our certified landscape inspector has made the determination. Your personal opinion, while noted, does not supersede the community guidelines. Furthermore, your 5-day grace period has expired. The fine has now been increased to $750, and if the plant is not removed within 48 hours, a contractor will be dispatched, and you will be billed for all associated costs, including a further $250 non-compliance fee." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. The other board members remained impassive, their faces blank. Eleanor felt a wave of dizzying helplessness wash over her. She looked from Ms. Albright's stern, unyielding gaze to the indifferent faces of the other board members, then down at the innocent green plant in her hands. It was a battle she was clearly losing, a lone gardener against an impenetrable fortress of bylaws and bureaucratic indifference. The injustice of it all burned in her chest. She had followed all the rules, tried to communicate, yet she was being railroaded, fined, and threatened with forced entry onto her property. The $750 fine, coupled with the looming threat of contractor fees, was a significant financial blow, but it was the principle that truly stung. She was cornered, pushed to a breaking point, but as she walked out of the sterile clubhouse, a new, fierce resolve began to harden within her. She didn't know how, but she would prove them wrong. She had to. The sting of Ms. Albright's dismissal and the escalating fine had, paradoxically, ignited a cold, unwavering fire within Eleanor. Humiliation was a powerful catalyst, transforming her quiet frustration into a steely resolve. She would not be bullied, not by an arbitrary rule, and certainly not by a plant she instinctively knew was not a noxious weed. Her initial attempts at polite inquiry had failed, and direct appeal had been met with a bureaucratic brick wall. It was clear, if she wanted justice, she would have to unearth it herself. She began her research immediately, transforming her cozy home office into a war room of botanical investigation. Her laptop glowed late into the night, its screen a portal to countless gardening forums, university extension sites, and obscure botanical databases. She started broadly, typing in descriptions of the plant's leaves: fuzzy green broadleaf, stubborn garden plant, weed with thick stem. The results were a deluge of common garden invaders, none of which matched the peculiar character of her backyard enigma. Frustration mounted, each dead-end search feeling like another tiny victory for the unyielding HOA. She cross-referenced images, zoomed in on microscopic details of the plant's fuzzy surface with her phone camera, comparing them to countless online photos. Hours blurred into days, fueled by lukewarm tea and a stubborn refusal to admit defeat. Her meticulous nature, usually reserved for pruning roses or planting seasonal beds, now became her greatest asset in this digital hunt. She shifted her strategy, moving beyond general weed identification to more localized flora, searching for plants unique to her region, her specific climate zone, even her subdivision soil type. She delved into state agricultural department websites, then environmental conservation groups, looking for lists of native plants, endangered species, anything that might offer a clue. The plant itself, meanwhile, continued its quiet, unassuming growth in her garden, a silent challenge. To the HOA secret, Eleanor would go outside, kneel beside it, studying its every detail, the subtle reddish tint on its stem, the minute serrations on its leaf edges, the way its new growth unfurled with an almost deliberate slowness. She even noticed, for the first time, a tiny, almost imperceptible bud forming deep within its foliage, a hint of a flower yet to bloom. It was close to 2 a.m. on the third night, her eyes gritty from staring at the screen, when a faint glimmer of recognition sparked. She had stumbled upon a PDF from a local university's botany department, a guide to rare and protected flora of the mid-Atlantic region. Scrolling through page after page of Latin names and intricate botanical drawings, her finger hovered over an image. It wasn't an exact match, but the leaf shape, the stem, the very essence of the plant, was strikingly similar. The accompanying text described a plant called Viridian nocturne, or, more commonly, the silver leaf moon petal. Her heart gave a sudden, violent lurch. She clicked on a hyperlink, and a new page loaded, filled with detailed photographs. There it was. Every fuzzy leaf, every subtle vein, every characteristic her plant possessed, perfectly mirrored in the high-resolution images. The tiny bud sheet observed, it was the precursor to a rare, almost ethereal, pale green flower that bloomed only at night, hence moon petal. But the true revelation, the one that sent a jolt of electrifying disbelief through her, lay in the accompanying text. The silver leaf moon petal was not just rare. It was listed as a state-protected species in their very own state, with a threatened status. It was a plant of significant ecological importance, providing a crucial food source for a specific, endangered nocturnal moth, and its presence indicated a healthy, undisturbed microecosystem. It was, in essence, the botanical equivalent of finding a bald eagle nesting in your backyard, only to be fined for it. Eleanor stared at the screen, a wild mix of disbelief, incandescent excitement, and a furious, righteous determination coursing through her veins. The HOA hadn't just made a mistake, they had threatened to destroy a protected natural treasure. The absurdity of it was staggering, but the power of this discovery was undeniable. The tables had not just turned, they had been utterly flipped. The exhaustion of the past few days vanished, replaced by a frantic, almost manic energy. She had to gather irrefutable proof, and quickly. The 48-hour deadline for the contractor loomed like a dark cloud. She grabbed her high-resolution camera, rushing out into the cool night air, flashlight in hand. She took dozens of photos from every conceivable angle, wide shots of the plant in its context, extreme close-ups of its leaves and stem, even trying to capture the nascent bud. She documented the surrounding plants, the soil, anything that could serve as evidence of its natural, undisturbed growth. Back inside, she immediately began drafting emails, not to the HOA, but to every relevant authority she could find: the State Department of Natural Resources, the local university's botany department, the Regional Environmental Protection Agency, even a renowned botanist whose name she found in an academic journal. She attached her newly taken photos, the violation notice, and a concise, urgent explanation of her discovery. The waiting was agonizing. She knew government agencies and university departments move slowly, but she didn't have that luxury. She called the DNR's general line first thing in the morning, leaving a detailed message. Then, she tried the university, finally reaching a harried administrative assistant who promised to forward her email to Professor Aris Thorne, a leading expert in native flora. Eleanor knew this was her lifeline. She spent the rest of the day researching Professor Thorne, finding articles he'd published, lectures he'd given, building a mental case for why he had to help her. By late afternoon, a miracle, an email from Professor Thorne himself. He was intrigued. He wrote, and asked for more specific coordinates and a few more detailed photos. Eleanor immediately sent everything she had, her fingers flying across the keyboard, a surge of hope propelling her forward. She received a follow-up email just an hour later. Ms. Vance, based on your photos, it does indeed appear you have a specimen of viridian nocturne. This is highly unusual for a residential area, but not impossible. I will contact the state DNR on your behalf and try to arrange for an official verification. Do not, under any circumstances, allow anyone to remove that plant. The words were a lifeline, a confirmation, and a powerful validation. Eleanor printed every email, every scientific article, every piece of documentation. She had her proof. The HOA had threatened her with a fine and forced removal, but now Eleanor Vance was armed not just with knowledge, but with the full weight of environmental protection laws. She was ready to face them, no longer as a bewildered gardener, but as the unlikely protector of a rare and precious species, and she would not yield. Armed with a thick binder overflowing with scientific papers, official emails, and high-resolution photographs, Eleanor Vance walked back into the sterile confines of the Lakeview Estates HOA office, a stark contrast to her previous visit. This time, her nervousness was tempered by a potent cocktail of righteous indignation and quiet confidence. She wasn't just a bewildered homeowner anymore. She was a woman on a mission, backed by irrefutable facts. She had an appointment with Ms. Albright, secured only after Eleanor had insisted she had new, critical information regarding the alleged violation. Ms. Albright sat across the polished table, her expression as unyielding as ever, her arms crossed, clearly expecting another futile plea. Ms. Vance, I trust you are here to confirm the removal of the plant, as she stated, her voice laced with an almost bored impatience. Eleanor took a deep breath, her gaze steady. No, Ms. Albright, I am here to inform you that the plant in my garden is not a noxious weed. It is a viridian nocturne, a silver-leaf moonpetal, and it is a state-protected species. She slid the binder across the table. Here is the official documentation from the State Department of Natural Resources, confirming its identity and protected status. Here are emails from Professor Arise Thorne, a leading botanist, who has personally verified its presence, and here are the relevant state laws regarding the protection of such species. Miss Albright's eyes, usually so sharp and dismissive, widened almost imperceptibly as she glanced at the DNR letterhead. Her lips thinned into a hard line. Protected species, this is preposterous. Our inspector is certified. We have procedures. She pushed the binder back slightly, as if the papers themselves were contaminated. This is a residential community, Ms. Vance, not a nature preserve. Our bylaws clearly state ... double quotes your bylaws, Eleanor interrupted, her voice gaining strength, cannot supersede state law. Ms. Albright, destroying a protected species carries significant penalties, both for the individual and, I imagine, for any organization that orders its destruction. The fine you issued, and the threat of forced removal, are in direct violation of state environmental statutes. Ms. Albright's face flushed a mottled red. Are you threatening the HOA, Ms. Vance? She hissed, her composure finally cracking. I am merely stating the facts, Ms. Albright, and I believe the community, and perhaps the local media, would find these facts very interesting. Eleanor's subtle hint at public exposure was a calculated risk, but it landed squarely. Ms. Albright, visibly shaken, ended the meeting abruptly, promising to review the information and get back to her. Eleanor left the office, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips, but she knew this was just the beginning. She didn't have to wait for the HOA to respond. The story, too compelling to remain confined to bureaucratic offices, began to leak. Eleanor had cautiously reached out to a sympathetic neighbor. Martha, a retired schoolteacher known for her community activism and her sharp tongue, sharing her plight and the astonishing discovery. Martha, outraged by the HOA's heavy-handedness, immediately posted Eleanor's story, complete with photos of the plant and snippets of the DNR letter, on the Lakeview Estates community Facebook group. The response was immediate and explosive. HOA fining Eleanor Vance for a protected plant. This is outrageous. Our HOA is destroying nature. I knew they were bad, but this is a new low. The comment section erupted with a mix of disbelief, anger, and solidarity. Simultaneously, Professor Thorne, true to his word, had contacted a local environmental advocacy group, Green Spaces Alliance, whose director, a passionate and media-savvy woman named Clara Jensen, saw the story's potential for raising public awareness. Clara immediately contacted a reporter at the Lakeview Gazette, a small but influential local newspaper. Within days, a headline blared. Across the front page, HOA targets rareweed, homeowner fights back with state law. The article detailed Eleanor's journey, the HOA's rigid stance, and the scientific verification of the silver-leaf moon petal. It featured a prominent photo of Eleanor kneeling beside her plant, a determined glint in her eye. The public uproar was swift and fierce. Petitions circulated online and offline, demanding the HOA rescind the fine and apologize. Local news channels picked up the Gazette story, sending camera crews to Eleanor's house. She, a private gardener, suddenly found herself giving interviews, explaining the ecological importance of the plant, and articulating her frustration with the HOA's arbitrary power. The narrative was clear: a powerful, faceless bureaucracy versus an ordinary homeowner protecting nature. Inside the HOA, the pressure was immense. The board, usually insulated from direct public outcry, was now inundated with angry emails, phone calls, and even protests outside the clubhouse. Ms. Albright, once so composed, appeared increasingly flustered in public appearances, offering vague statements about adhering to community standards and investigating the matter. Whispers of internal division began to emerge. Some board members, particularly those with younger families or a more progressive outlook, questioned Ms. Albright's handling of the situation, fearing the negative publicity would devalue property in Lakeview Estates. Others, staunch traditionalists, dug in their heels, unwilling to concede an inch. The conflict had escalated beyond a simple plant violation. It had become a symbol of community power, environmental responsibility, and the often absurd nature of HOA authority. The stage was set for a final, decisive confrontation, one that would determine not only the fate of Eleanor's silver-leaf moon petal, but that perhaps the very future of the Lakeview Estates HOA itself. The air in the Lakeview Estates community clubhouse was thick with anticipation, a palpable tension that hummed beneath the fluorescent lights. Tonight was the night of the special HOA board meeting, called specifically to address the Vance matter, as it had been euphemistically termed in the official notice. The room, usually sparsely populated for monthly gatherings, was packed to capacity, spilling out into the hallway. Neighbors, local environmental activists from Green Spaces Alliance, and even a few reporters with their cameras poised, filled every seat. Eleanor sat in the front row, her heart thrumming a nervous rhythm against her ribs, but her posture was resolute. Beside her sat Professor Arise Thorne, his kind, scholarly face exuding quiet authority, and Clara Jensen, the director of Green Spaces Alliance, whose presence alone was a powerful statement of support. Opposite them, at the long table, sat the HOA board, their faces a mixture of strained composure and simmering anxiety. Ms. Albright, at the head, looked particularly grim, her usual severe demeanor now tinged with a visible pallor. The public outcry had clearly taken its toll. The meeting began with a brief, perfunctory statement from Ms. Albright, acknowledging the unforeseen complexities of the situation. Then, she grudgingly invited Eleanor to present her case. Eleanor stood, her voice clear and steady despite the tremor in her hands. She began not with accusations, but with the simple beauty of her garden, then transitioned to the bewildering violation notice, the increasing fines, and the HOA's unyielding stance. As she spoke, she projected high-resolution images of the Viridian Nocturne onto a screen, showcasing its delicate features, its unique growth. Then, she introduced Professor Thorne, the professor, in his calm, academic voice, delivered a concise, yet powerful presentation. He explained the Viridian Nocturne's scientific classification, its extreme rarity, its critical role in the local ecosystem as a host plant for the endangered moonpetal moth, and its protected status under state law. He cited specific legislative acts, detailing the fines and penalties for disturbing or destroying such a species, emphasizing that these laws superseded any local HOA covenants. He concluded by stating, unequivocally, that the plant in Eleanor's garden was indeed a pristine specimen of Viridian Nocturne and that its forced removal would constitute a serious environmental offense. Following Professor Thorne, Clara Jensen stepped forward. Her voice, though softer than the professor's, carried an undeniable passion. She spoke not just of legalities, but of community responsibility, environmental stewardship, and the importance of preserving local biodiversity. She highlighted the overwhelming public support for Eleanor, referencing the thousands of signatures on the online petition and the dozens of letters sent to the HOA. She gently but firmly reminded the board of the negative publicity they had garnered and the potential long-term damage to Lakeview Estate's reputation as a desirable, environmentally conscious community. The atmosphere in the room was electric. Every word from Eleanor, Professor Thorne, and Clara resonated with the audience, who murmured in agreement and occasionally applauded softly. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their earlier dismissive attitudes crumbling under the weight of expert testimony and overwhelming public opinion. Ms. Albright's eyes darted nervously between the speakers and the expectant faces in the crowd. The internal divisions within the board became apparent as a younger board member, Mr. Davies, cleared his throat. Ms. Albright, he began, his voice hesitant but firm, Professor Thorne's evidence is compelling, and the community's message is clear. I move that we immediately rescind the fine issued to Ms. Vance and formally recognize the Viridian Nocturne as a protected natural asset within Lakeview Estates. Another board member, Mrs. Chen, quickly seconded the motion. Ms. Albright, her face a mask of defeat, knew she was cornered. The legal implications were dire, and the public relations disaster was already in full swing. With a barely audible sigh, she called for a vote. The motion passed unanimously, save for Ms. Albright's own abstention, a final, futile gesture of defiance. The verdict was delivered. The $750 fine was officially rescinded, and the Viridian Nocturne in Eleanor's garden was not only safe, but now a celebrated landmark. A wave of applause erupted from the audience, a collective sigh of relief and triumph. Eleanor felt a profound sense of lightness, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She looked at Professor Thorne and Clara, offering a grateful smile, then turned to the cheering crowd, her eyes welling up with tears of relief and gratitude. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind. Reporters swarmed Eleanor, eager for her reaction. She spoke simply, expressing her gratitude for the support and her hope that this incident would inspire others to look closer at the natural world around them. The HOA, under immense pressure, issued a terse public statement, acknowledging their oversight and committing to revising their landscaping policies to better align with environmental conservation efforts. It was a grudging concession, but a concession nonetheless. For Eleanor, life slowly returned to its quiet rhythm, but it was a rhythm subtly altered. She was no longer just a gardener. She was, in the eyes of many, a local hero, a symbol of resilience against arbitrary power. Her garden, once her private sanctuary, became a point of interest, with neighbors occasionally stopping by, not to complain, but to admire the now famous silverleaf moonpetal, the lasting legacy of the weed that wasn't extended far beyond Eleanor's backyard. The Lakeview Estates HOA, chastened by the public backlash, underwent significant changes. Ms. Albright, facing internal pressure and a waning reputation, quietly resigned a few months later. The HOA revised its bylaws, incorporating clauses that prioritized native and protected species, even establishing a small native plant committee to review future landscaping guidelines. Community awareness blossomed. Neighbors, inspired by Eleanor's fight, started identifying and protecting native plants in their own yards. Local schools invited Professor Thorne to give talks on biodiversity, often featuring Eleanor's story, a real-world example. The silverleaf moonpetal, once an anonymous weed, became a symbol of vigilance, a reminder that sometimes the most valuable things are found in the most unexpected places, and that standing up for what is right, even against seemingly insurmountable odds, can lead to profound and lasting change. Eleanor continued to tend her garden, now with an even deeper sense of purpose, knowing that her small patch of earth was not just a home for beautiful plants, but a testament to the power of one individual's unwavering conviction